The Fury is a very interesting ship, and the speculation that comes out of it, the arguments, just the ideas of what it could change they range from very conservative to very spectacular. I find myself still debating a lot of these things, and that's obviously evident when anybody watches these videos. It's so much stream of consciousness. There is no script. It's me talking the idea out loud in my head and just kind of looking at my own thought process. And then, of course, reading comments and then going like, oh, you know what? That person's right about this. Oh, that person makes a good point over there. And this is kind of, in a weird way, I kind of sometimes remind people, it's like, this is my therapeutic tool to check my thinking against the thinking of other people. And they're like, oh, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about that. And like, oh yeah, no, that actually makes sense. That could be a possibility. And it's basically my way of sounding my ideas out against, potentially 1,000 people watching the video. But the Fury, I find myself sitting back and looking at it and thinking, okay, this could be two things. Now, possibility number one, we know that fighters have some pretty severe limitations. When we think of Squadron 42, fighters are ideal. When we think of Star Citizen, fighters start to show their limitations. When we start thinking about extreme ranges in solar systems, and the fact that Stanton is actually a very small solar system, and many of these ships are built to have quantum drives or have the potential to go so much further into deep space, and places where fighters in some cases just can't even match that range, no matter how you set them up. And so the obvious counter to that was something like the snub fighter, but the snub fighter for the longest time was limited. It was limited to its existence with the Constellation. The Constellation is a ship that has matured and certainly grown out, but the use of its snub fighter has not really caught on all that much. With the Fury, if we have the possibility of storing the Fury on a standard cargo bay, it takes a ship like this, the Caterpillar, and you think about, well, you could put 5 Furies in there, or you could put 4 in the side bays and basically put a whole load of missiles up front so that you can use your tractor beam, as CIG has illustrated, to reload missiles on the ones that need missiles reloaded. So you could operate 4 fighters off of a Caterpillar, and you could provide a certain amount of support. And the Caterpillar itself, while it's not an ideal combat vessel, it's certainly no slouch. And this does kick open a lot of interesting doors. Is the Fury the first of many? Is it kind of a point where people start looking at snub fighters wholly differently? If people start saying, okay, we actually do have, we have the, the Archimedes and the Merlin, right? We have the Fury now, potentially. Well, obviously. And technically we also have the Drake Dragonfly, right? And then, there are some other space bikes that can be used in space. But we now have the possibility of, with the Fury, kind of really bridging that gap and really kind of pushing this to the forefront, because it's no longer something that's really dependent on what ship you bring. And so you might see a wide adoption, especially when it's kind of at the forefront of such a big sale. You might see a lot of players going out and saying, oh my god, I can use a Starfarer and I can refuel and rearm these things, and I can carry how many of them. And people will start looking at a Hercules and they'll start saying, oh my god, I could have, like, the front end of the Hercules opens up and it's just like a swarm of bees comes flying out of it. And the fact that it kind of looks a little bit like a TIE fighter, like a baby TIE Advanced, or, well, not really a TIE Defender. TIE Defenders are pretty big, but you know what I mean. This is something that could rapidly catch on. I think that that's the first possibility, where the light fighters, kind of get brushed aside for these ships, these snub ships. a lot of the limitations with fighters, CIG has kind of fought to kind of mitigate. We've seen that with the little mini cargo area on the Gladius, but you need facilities. You need a bathroom, you need a washroom, you need a place to take off your helmet and eat and drink. All of these things that in some of the fighters you certainly, you can do, but not the way you would really want to. And I'm not sure if CIG will let you just take your helmet off and set it on the console while you eat a candy bar. It's possible, but there are a fair number of limitations, and so these things could be seen as bridging the gap of convenience in a lot of issues. And if they're fairly mobile and decent and competitive with something like the Gladius or the Aero platform, you could see wide adoption. You could see a lot of people kind of moving over in this direction. And that, I think, makes it very interesting. Certainly, a lot of Caterpillar photo porn is dedicated to what ships can I fit and launch from my Caterpillar over the years. And so if you could fit a whole bunch of Furies on here, very interesting. Being able to bring that fighter capability out into deep, deep space makes these things very interesting. And once kind of people get attached to a platform, does it become the mainstay, right? So, that's kind of the first possibility. The second possibility is that beyond a certain range into deep spaces where a lot of the light fighters just really die off, and it just becomes a bit of a snub fighter game out in the deep, deep reaches of space. Probably, I think the more likely of the two outcomes. I don't think, okay, there's going to be a fairly good run on the Fury. There's way too much hype going on. But I think that ultimately it will probably end up being at a point where out into deep, deep space, you're going to see a lot more of the snub fighters. And there's probably going to be a fair amount over the next little while if this thing shows up flight ready to go, and it can mate to a standard cargo bay. If you can store it in a standard cargo bay, that I think will be really the determining factor. If it's launch bay only, that changes things. But if it's any cargo bay you can store this thing in, this could be a profound change. But the second possibility, I think, is the more likely outcome, which is the further you get out there into deep space, the more snub fighters become the standard and light fighters die off, just because there is such an enormous Gladius / Aero community. And I don't think that they're really just going to go like, oh, well, and just throw it over their shoulder casually and just say, out with the old, in with the new. So I think that the second possibility is more likely. Overall, I don't think that the Fury represents a massive shift in fighter combat and Star Citizen. I think that really for a massive shift to happen to the point where, it becomes a snub fighter game at the light fighter level, well, light to medium. I think for that to really take place, we need two other things to happen. One would be guaranteed you can put these ships in any cargo bay. That would be pretty big. But another one that is actually distant and not in the near future, well, it depends, is the new flight model changes. Because the flight model changes obviously are much more impactful on fighters than they are on the bigger, larger ships, which in general still kind of follow the same basic rules. The performance of Quantum is obviously going to be altered. Its performance envelope, its expectations are going to be altered. But in general, I think that bigger ships are going to be more profoundly affected by the armor changes than they are going to be affected by the flight changes, as CIG had detailed them months ago. So when we see these things emerge, we'll probably know more. But I think that you really need those two things to really kind of happen, to really kind of sit there and say, oh, this is the Fury, this is the new hotness, this is going to change everything. I don't think so. But I think it does present some very interesting, it does kick open some very interesting doors, and it does lead to some very interesting conversations. At the very least, you know what it is at an anniversary sale? It's a cheap LTI token, and that's going to drive more sales than anything else, because people will be able, at the anniversary sale, it, you know, or the the biannual anniversary sale being, you know, the actual anniversary sale and Invictus. What really happens is that people look at what has happened over the last year in Star Citizen, the ships that they missed out on, and what is going to happen, or what is expected to happen over the next year. And then they start, you know, shifting things around in their fleet accordingly. And having the LTI token there just makes it so much easier. Yeah. The one-person tank, let's wait and see how it goes. I mean, ground vehicles are a whole other video that would need to be done on ground vehicles, their current state, and their relative uselessness in the Star Citizen universe, tragically, right now. But I think that at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of hype. There's going to be a lot of confusion. There's going to be a lot of over speculation. Like, oh my God, this is going to change everything. But in reality, I think that the outcome of this is going to be largely an LTI token and an interesting possibility that needs changes in the future to really tell if it's going to be a big thing. And that's really key in understanding things like this in video games, right? So often when you look at video games and you say, oh, this was the moment that everything changed, right? This is the moment that the game got worse or the game got better. This was the change that really kind of kicked that into motion. But oftentimes what happens is when these changes happen, they aren't these monumental moments where the choir sings and the trumpets blare. They're often moments that are very, you know, innocuous, moments that are very quiet, moments that you blink and you missed it type things. We can look back at those moments and say, oh, this was the moment that, you know, Group Finder changed the way the community relates to one another in this MMO or that MMO, or this change to the auction house completely upended the whole, you know, economy. But no one really noticed the change when it happened because it was such a little thing, but its knock-on effects happened really sometimes years later. And so this could be a profound moment in Star Citizen, but because obviously because of some of the parameters that I've discussed here not having come to fruition themselves, things like the armor system, things like, well, can you store it in the cargo bay, and obviously flight model changes to fighters. Because these things haven't arrived yet, this could be a very profound change in the beginning of a huge shift in Star Citizen, but we won't recognize it yet because all the other contributing factors have yet to kind of cause this seed to germinate and sprout.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.